I'm going to speak about a model for successful change management, and as with the other models I've spoken about, I'm going to begin with a universal paradigm of progress that's represented by the way in which a seed becomes a flower. So in that journey, we have a seed, and then there is some germination that takes place, gives rise to a stalk, and then that may result in the reality of a flower. When we think about this pattern of progress, there's three stages. We have the seed or the physical stage, which really reflects the status quo, where there's an impulse to keep things the way they are. We have the stalk or the vital stage, which is about experimentation, adventure, exercising energy. And then we have the flower or mental stage, which is reflective of the intent of purpose or realization of the purpose that perhaps was inherent in the seed. So when we think about these three stages become or create the framework for a model for successful change management. What we'll do is we're going to take each of these stages and reflect it as a dimension in this model. So we have the mental or the flower dimension, we have the vital or stalk dimension, and we have the physical or seed dimension. And taking the cue from the flower again, where we see that the purpose is realized in this flower, we'll say that the mental dimension is the most important and needs to be worked out first for change to be successful. So what that really means is that, for example, we may have a concept, and if this concept is half-baked or narrow, then the chance of the change being successful is very low, and we must do something to create a more comprehensive, well-rounded, accepted idea or concept. And typically there's a number of things we can do to move things up this dimension. So we can specifically focus on clarifying intent, and this may take the form of visioning, of really thinking about what the future is, of thinking about principles that would be alive in that future. We can also take that intent or concept or initiative and make it an imperative within the context of our organization or business. Being an imperative means that there's a lot more energy around it, and then we can specifically manage so that we achieve intent. So intent management, so that all the different programs and projects that perhaps emanate from this concept are really focused around achieving the intent rather than putting some kind of systems or processes in place. So provided we do programs of this nature, we're going to create a much fuller idea, a more comprehensive idea that will have a higher probability of success. Now once we have that idea in place, it becomes imperative to put some vitality into the idea. So in the absence of vitality, if the vitality is low, what it will mean is that perhaps this concept or initiative is just owned by a single department or area, and it really lacks influence and the ability to fulfill itself within an organization. And so it becomes necessary to push this so that there is system-wide or ownership from the whole organization where everybody believes it's their idea and it has to succeed. And here what we would do in order to increase this vitality is several things. We could certainly have executive ownership over the concept or idea. We could then cascade that ownership throughout the organization. We could put in place some kind of governance structure that addressed any risk to that vitality in real time. And when we do things like this, then what's going to happen is the vitality of that idea is going to increase tremendously, of that initiative is going to increase tremendously. And then we come to the third dimension, and this dimension is the physical or the status quo, and really what it reflects is that even if we have a very well thought out idea, if there's vitality behind it, the reality is that it's still going to meet various kinds of dynamics that are reflective of the status quo in the organization. So for instance, there might be things like resistance or lack of synergy or a culture of a certain kind in the organization that doesn't allow change to really happen, or there might be a lack of capacity to really execute on a change of this nature. So if these things exist, then again what's going to happen is that even though you have a great idea with vitality, the status quo is going to supersede it, and whatever it is not going to come to fruition. So it becomes necessary to manage things like resistance, manage the lack of synergy, manage the culture, manage lack of capacity, so that what we have is a movement away from that dynamic of keeping the status quo to allowing new possibility to emerge within the organization. So what we see is that in the absence of really working these three dimensions, a change or initiative may appear as being done. However, it's really like a black hole, because the organization thinks it's done something, but all it's doing is sucking in a lot of resources and a lot of cost, but nothing really is happening. In order for, when successful change does happen, however, it may look something like this, where it animates the full organization because these three dimensions have been worked. Now, a couple of very interesting things about this. One is that, so we have here, in the absence of working these three dimensions, it's like a black hole, and then when you work these three dimensions, then there's a kind of a energetic movement that begins to take place, and this results in a flowering of the possibility behind or of this initiative that we're thinking about in this change model. So what we have here is a flower, a paradigm being produced from the black hole to the possibility. And then, as we had started off initially saying that this is the most important component, so really what's imperative here is that the physical and the vital are really serving this mental or flower component. So what we see is that, again, from this notion of status quo, we have movement through the stalk and realization into a flower. So interestingly enough, there's different aspects of this flower that show up in this successful change paradigm.